Hey everybody, welcome to Bura Tech. In this episode, we're going to be exploring the idea of what happens when a solar flare hits Earth. Alright, welcome back. Before we start this video, I want to make sure that you like and subscribe. The more likes and subscribers we get, the more content we can make. And remember that this channel doesn't do a Patreon, instead we sell our digital products down below. The more money we get from the products that you buy below, the more content we can make. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about solar flares, but before we even talk about that, let's talk about programmers. Now, if you're a programmer, chances are you have one of the safest jobs in the next 10 years. I always say that, and it's fairly true. The only thing that can disrupt that is if our technology stops working. And which event can make technology stop working? Well, that is a solar flare. That is a huge solar flare that can absolutely wipe out technology. So I often talk about job security, and I do really agree that if you are a programmer, then chances are your job security is going to be fairly secure over the next 10 years. Of course, that is in the assumption that technology is going to be working. Now, in this COVID-19 pandemic, what's happened is that a lot of people with real-world skills, that is, skills that require human interaction, have been adversely affected. And if you're a programmer, or if you have a job that can be outsourced easily online, or that has a huge online presence or technology presence, chances are you haven't been affected too much. But if you are a person that has to deal with other people in their job, then you have been greatly affected. Now, some of the things that are moving online are doctor's appointments or therapy appointments, and these have been traditionally dealt with human interaction. And I would argue that if you need to go to a doctor, going to a doctor in person is probably better, but not for everything. If you need to fill your prescription and that's all you need to do, then having a video conference with a doctor is probably much better because you might not be exposed to some sick people in the lobby, and it's just much easier for you to set up a time. And furthermore, you don't even have to commute your body to a doctor's office. You can just simply watch it on your phone, get the prescription, and then if the system is good enough, you can send that prescription right to the pharmacy and then pick it up. Things are really good. And believe it or not, therapy is done online today as well, and it has been pushed forward because of this COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I don't expect therapy to completely be online. I expect people to absolutely go see someone, because if you are going to therapy, then chances are you probably want to talk to someone in real time and in person. And of course, all of these services need programmers behind them, so it's no wonder that companies like Zoom have been doing very well, and they need a lot of programmers to make things happen. And there's also a lot of other technology advisors that they also need as well. So in order to upgrade their encryption, they need a lot of programmers to implement the encryption and a lot of cybersecurity professionals to tell them what to implement. So I think what's going to happen is that people that are overly reliant on technology are going to be adversely affected if a solar flare happens. How common are solar flares? Well, you can watch this video from Kurzgesagt that will basically tell you everything you need to know about solar flares. So I've known about solar flares for a long time, and I'm so glad that this video came out, because this video tells you exactly everything you need to know. So the chances of a solar flare, a major solar flare, is about 50% by 2050. Now that is a long period of time, but also those are pretty good odds. So you should be preparing today. You have to have some skills that are not technology based. And this is something that is going to be in contrast to what is currently thriving. Because one thing about your career that you need to understand is you need to prepare for the worst. So you always need to have a metaphorical glass box which you need to break in case of a disaster. And this is something that you need to do. Everyone needs to prepare for the worst. And this is probably the worst thing that could happen to a programmer, is if technology is completely wiped out. Now, technology can be wiped out for not only, let's say, a few months, it could be a few years before things get back to normal. And in that case, you are out of a job. So you have to prepare for that. Now, how do you do that? Well, as a programmer, all your job is online. You need to find some kind of thing that you're good at is not online. And you also need to be saving. Now, in the past, a lot of financial advisors would tell you to save 3 months of income. Now, I think after this pandemic, I think so many people have been so adversely affected by it that people are probably going to have 6 months to a year of savings. And people are going to really save so that they don't get underwater in any way, shape, or form. And this has already happened in other economies, especially after bubbles. So the best example of this is probably Japan. Now, if you don't know, Japan hit a huge housing bubble and stock market bubble in 1989, literally on December 31st, 1989. And the stock market and housing prices have never been the same since. They've always been going down. In fact, a little while ago, housing prices rose in Japan and it was an absolute miracle. And believe it or not, this can happen to the rest of the world. It's called Japanification. Now, I'm not saying it is going to happen, but it could happen. But one of the things about Japan is that the citizens of Japan save a lot of money. They save way more than anybody else in the developed world. And I think this is going to happen to pretty much the entire developed world as a result of this pandemic. So I think people are going to have 6 months of cash on hand. This is either at the bank or they might even buy gold and silver coins. Now, gold and silver have been a store of wealth for over 5,000 years, and there's no way that that's going to change anytime soon. So if there's any advice that I can give you to prepare for a solar flare, I would say buy some gold and silver. It doesn't really matter if the price goes up or goes down. The point is that you are storing wealth. It's very unlikely that there's going to be some major gold or silver deposit that will lower the value of gold. But if a solar flare does happen and all of our electronics gets wiped out, gold and silver are going to be key. And I would bet that in that situation, gold and silver prices would skyrocket. So even if you bought gold and silver today and it halved its price, then you should maybe buy more if that happens, because the best way to invest in gold and silver is the dollar cost average. But let's say you buy some gold and silver, it drops 50%, and then a solar flare happens, you might make 2-3 times or maybe even 10 times of what you have originally invested in that situation. The value of gold and silver is possibly a topic for another time, but if there's any piece of advice, I would highly recommend that you do that. And I would also recommend that you save as much money as possible and that you don't overspend your money and buy into so many different assets, that is housing, etc. At the same time though, gold and silver are hard assets and real estate is also hard assets. So as long as you're not over leveraged, I think it's probably not bad to have some real estate. However, you might be caught in a situation where your renters don't pay. And I don't think the world is prepared for a solar flare for the exact same reasons that the world was not prepared for the pandemic. Even though we had fair warning that a pandemic can happen at any time, a solar flare can also happen at any time. And luckily, at least thanks to this Kurzgesagt video, there's a lot of people that are working on it and there's a lot of solutions out there. But we do have to prepare, and we have to prepare more, because the countries that don't prepare are going to be very adversely affected. So just like today, we didn't really know what would be a great success and a great failure. And if a solar flare happens, we won't really know what will be the success and a complete failure in terms of how to make as much money as possible. One thing that I can recommend is, again, gold and silver and saving your money, and to not be over leveraged. That is taking out home equity lines of credit and tons of line of credits and have tons of debt. This is something that you should absolutely try to pay down as much as you possibly can. And if you're cash rich, I think that you are going to be ahead of the game. So if you're also a fan of this channel, I always say you have to read and react to the situation. So if a solar flare happens today and technology is wiped out for maybe 6 months to a year, you have to figure out what people are making money on, learn how to do that job, and then go do that job. This is something that already people are doing when they're learning to code. They need to learn some new technology to get a job. And the faster you do that and the more effective you do that, the better job you will get. Now, if you're smart enough to be a programmer, then you're smart enough to retool your thinking to something else. And this is something that I also highly recommend. Even if your complete goal is to learn to code, you should do other things. Maybe you should learn Photoshop or graphic design or 3D modeling or something else that is not programming, but the point is that you're learning. And the more that you learn something new and get good at something new, it doesn't matter what it is, the better off you'll be. Because in the circumstances where the rug is pulled out from under you, you have this power to learn something new and learn something so good that you can be employed at it very quickly. So remember, if you're learning to code, it's not the code part that's the most important aspect of it. It's the learning something new to get a job, which is the most important part. It's the bigger picture of what you're trying to do. So hopefully a solar flare doesn't happen, because our technologically based society is going to do fairly poorly, and it's probably going to be compounded by the fact that everything is moving online. Wouldn't it be crazy is if we had a pandemic that moved most things online, and then we had a solar flare to completely wipe out all of those gains in productivity gains from our online interactions? I think that would be fairly ironic. Now, that absolutely can happen. Now, I really hope a solar flare doesn't happen, but it could, and you always have to prepare for the worst. So if you're a programmer or all of your job is online, how are you preparing for a solar flare? Please write your comments down below. Remember that this channel doesn't do a Patreon, instead we sell our digital products down below. The more money we get from the content that you buy below, the more content we can make. Our goal is to get to 10,000 paid subscribers per month. If we can do that, that would be absolutely awesome. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. Not only do you make this YouTube channel possible, you make Mammoth Interactive possible. And please be sure to like and subscribe. The more likes and the more subscribers we get on YouTube, the more we will get pushed up in the algorithm. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in another video.